Well, Mr. Bryan, let's just start with how you got to Ackworth. I know you're from South Georgia. Why don't you talk about what brought your family up here?
Well, I was born in a little town in South Georgia, right across from Eufaula, Alabama. The name of the little town was Georgetown, Georgia. I mean, small. Nothing there then and nothing there now, hardly. But we were born there, and I went as far as grew up there and started first and second grade there. So all my parents and grandfathers and relatives were from South Georgia, Cuthbert, Georgetown, Quitman County. Quitman County, where Georgetown is located, is one of the smallest counties in Georgia and one of the most, I guess, a very poor rural county, still is. Anyway, my father was in the lumber business, cutting timber from different jobs. And he worked with my granddaddy some, and they would sawmill right off of people's land that they did. And my grandfather there in Quitman County on my daddy's side, whose name was Stonewall Jackson Bryan. And so we were all back then, and everybody, all my relatives had two names. Everybody was, my mother was Addie Lee, my aunt was Virgie Lou. Anyway, everybody was kind of two names from rural South there.
What were you other than Henry?
My middle name was Burns, Henry Burns Bryan. And he got Burns because that was my mother's maiden name.
I just saw your email address, H.T. Bryan.
H.T., and that was, the H.T. Bryan that I used was my wife's email.
Oh.
And so her name is Tracy, and that's where we got that.
Okay,
and
but Henry Burns,
she says I do have one of my own, but we use that all the time. And so anyway, we used the H.T. Bryan, and even her Facebook page should be listed under her, but because most of my friends are not on Facebook or
right.
So anyhow, I use her. She calls it creeping on hers, but that's what we use. But anyway,
Is Burns a family name?
Burns was my mother's maiden name, and my grandparents, which is the only grandparents I really knew. I never knew my daddy, Stonewall Jackson Bryan, and he was in that little rural county. He was tax collector, wore a suit. Never remember him much being so young, but I do know whenever he passed away, my mother just served out his term. I mean, they didn't even have an election. She just went right on, and we lived in the little town. We lived kind of across from the courthouse. They worked there, and it was definitely rural. Well, we've been back a few times, but anyway, whenever the lumber business kind of went a little bit out, my daddy had to take a job doing something else, and he went took a job with a construction company, so he could have steady work rather than that sawmilling. And of course, I didn't know we were, that poor, of course. But we started his construction. We started moving around a little bit. We lived in a little town, Toddleton. We lived in LaGrange. We lived making our way toward here. This was like in 49 or 50. So when we got the construction job, was working around 3rd Army Road here, the construction company. And when we got up here, we couldn't find my mother and looked for us a place to live around Marietta. Everything was too expensive, so she went to the outskirts, and that's how we found something in Ackworth. Over on Seminole Drive, right here in Ackworth, a little small apartment, and we moved in it. And they was my mother and daddy, and I had two sisters. And this was a small 2-bedroom owned by Mr. Golden, and it's a kind of a garage apartment. And we moved in there, and I never remember my daddy pulling a trailer or having a truck. And how we moved from South Georgia to here without doing that, I don't know. But I do know whenever we got here into Ackworth, he went to the furniture store on Main Street and got us a few things on a handshake. We had no money when he could, but he did have a job. And anyway, we lived there until we rented a place on Main Street, 200 yards from the red light south, which is right where the little Texaco station is now. It was a duplex house, two sides, and it's the corner of Wynn Street and Main.
Okay, I saw the picture with the columns out front. Didn't realize it was part of a duplex.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a duplex. It was used to be a nice house, and I think they had made it into a duplex. Anyway, at that time, we lived there. The 293 Main Street that runs past it, at that time, that was 41 highway, and that was a main highway. You know, they were, so imagine living right on 41, and we had and it was right beside the train tracks. Of course, we had no air conditioning, but we raised the windows, and it could hear those. I went to sleep a zillion nights hearing that train whistle, and as it come through Ackworth and so forth. But not knowing anything different, it was just great. I mean, it was. And then living in there.
This would be like about early 50s.
This would be the 50, 51 at most, and the next house we moved from was right there on Wynn Street, which is right behind what was Boone's service station. Actually, we moved from right off of Main Street, right on Wynn Street, which we was right there, and we actually lived there, and then we moved next door, and Daddy bought the house next door. I lived in all three houses on Wynn Street. So I grew up, pretty much my young life from the age of 7 or 8 until 16 or 17, right there, 200 yards from the red light. So I've seen a lot of. I'm definitely with what you call Ackworthian, I guess.
Well, the construction company must have been doing pretty well.
Well, after we got to Ackworth and Daddy worked for the construction company, they did a job at Lockheed on one of the runway. He run a motor grader and that kind of stuff on the construction company, not hammering and nailing, but more ground construction. And whenever they did the job at Lockheed and got through, the guy at Lockheed told my daddy, if you would like, we're going to need a maintenance man here. He never filled out an application. They kept him on at Lockheed, and he worked there as long I grew, as long as I can remember,
Well,
until he
was
retired.
on the ground floor, because it's 51 before they opened up.
52. That was in the.
Yeah, so he was there pretty close to
And he never missed a day of work. I never remember my daddy ever thinking, I'm a little tired today. I'm thinking, let's stay out of work. I never remember once him ever staying home and not working if he wasn't supposed to be. And then later on, my mother also worked at Lockheed. So Lockheed was.
What did she do?
She was just some clerical something. She was. Lockheed provided us with their hard work, with as much as anybody in the Ackworth area had, having two parents that really dedicated to work and.
Well, you couldn't have better benefits than to be at Lockheed.
Yeah, but of course, not many people. Most of the people around Ackworth at that time worked at the mill there in Ackworth, one of the mills. So Ackworth, they made, compared to that, pretty good money, I guess.
So they drove into work.
Every day, rode together, would leave early, so they could get a good parking spot, I guess, and I can remember being in the grammar school in Ackworth also. Somebody else might have mentioned this already, but being that Lockheed was there, all the kids was issued dog tags.
Okay.
And because it was a defense, I thought it might get. So that was a big thing to have. We were all issued dog tags. Not many grammar schools are issued dog tags.
Well, the schools were getting federal money because your parents were working.
Yeah. But
did you have to take those forms home to your parents?
Yep.
Where they could fill out that they
fill
were
out
working
to get the. I'm sure. But living right there on Wynn Street as a kid, growing up right there, I would walk. Of course, everybody walked or rode their bicycle, but I would walk downtown to the stores. We also had at that time, Ackworth had a little picture show. Little Legion Theater. I don't know if anybody's.
Well, got a few. Tell me about the Legion Theater. What did you go to watch there, and what was it like?
Well, growing up, I would watch westerns because that was where my heroes were. I always wanted to be a cowboy, still do. All my heroes were cowboys.
Was that on Saturday mornings that you were going?
I would go. Saturday mostly, and Saturday mornings I would go and stay as long as I could. I think it was, it was a quarter or something like that. It was real cheap and get some food. Of course, I was in walking distance. They'd have a cereal, from one week to the other, and I didn't care what was on. I watched whatever. Of course, you didn't have a lot of choices. We got, but that was the only movie theater I had, like most people had ever been in. And it was probably I don't know, maybe 150 seats in there or so. Had a balcony. They have, and it was just a happening place for to walk to, and your friends, hoping you might see a girl or something there, and then walking downtown on to the theater on Saturday. Back then, everybody came to town when I was growing up on Saturday. It would be busy. The little stores
Was there a farmer's market?
There was, no,
No.
I don't think there was a farmer's market. They were,
Well, I
but
know-
all the grocery stores had produce and farmer market type stuff, like outside,
I'm
like,
just wondering, because in Marietta at one time, they would drive their trucks in on
Right,
Saturday
right.
night,
Oh, yeah, oh.
Out of their truck.
now they would have some of that, yes, I'm wrong. There would be some of that. People selling watermelons and cantaloupe and corn, and yes, and peas and beans, and yeah, there would be some of that. But the grocery stores, would be before you would go. I remember when they built like the Red Dot over on 41, but this would be before they built that
Before
kind of stuff, and the grocery stores down in Ackworth would be where you would walk to. I even worked at Bag Groceries, at one of them down there, and of course I got all my clothes from like Eaton's, little department store, and I'd tennis shoes once a year. We'd get time when school time to start. Of course, we'd get a new pair of tennis shoes, and of course I'd wear them out in no time. And growing up and walking everywhere around the little town, Ackworth, mostly what I did as a kid is over at the Ackworth School, which was the grammar school and high school at that time, and middle school. Had a big, we called it the Flat, and that's where we would go over there, and all the neighborhood kids. Of course, they might be at that time kids my age, maybe 14 or 15, because Ackworth was a small town, as you know, and but it didn't matter if you were 11 or 14. If you were, we'd choose up and play baseball, and this was 7 or 8 months a year, and then the rest of the time it would be football, and we played all day, and from in the mornings till supper time. And of course, I'd roam all over, the flats and play as long as somebody would be there. And then when it wasn't enough to have a real game, we would just hit fly balls and so forth and play. And that was, the kids really, we didn't have any adult supervision. There was no adults down there. And if you had a disagreement with somebody, I guess kids, which all kids do, you might get into a little tussle, but you'd go home with your arm over his back, or you'd work it out. We had nobody telling us, what to do or whatever, and we made it, But that was some of the funniest times I remember.
What is on the spot where the flats were today?
That is right behind the Ackworth School that's there now.
Okay.
It used to be more ground because they took some of it up. And actually, that's where also at the time, Ackworth High School had their football practices there.
Oh, really?
And everything was held there. All the, we used to have it was the playground for the when you were in grammar school. We had like a May Day festival. I can remember people sitting on the banks and, us having the festival there. Everything happened at the flats. I mean, it was just, it was the place to play. And, it's right there off of Seminole, not too far from downtown. And everybody that lived in Ackworth, I'm sure played there, just like, I did. And then later on, as I got older, before, they didn't have any, when I was talking about us playing mostly at the flats, they didn't have a whole lot of organized baseball and stuff like that then. And then later on, I went to the Methodist church, and they had a little baseball team, MYF, they called it, and I played with them. And then the Baptist church, which most of my friends went to, so many of my friends went to, they had a team called the RAs. and then there was an Ackworth team, and I would play with the MYS when they had games. I would be on that team, and then if the RAs had somebody short, I could also go over to the Baptist
Okay.
and
MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship.
Methodist Youth Fellowship, which we went to. I grew up as a Methodist, so. But so many of my friends was Baptist. But of course, back then it didn't matter. I was playing baseball or whatever. I would have played with a
What positions did you play?
mostly outfield or catcher or whatever they needed. I guess That's but that's so many days on those flats. We just played all day long and not even go home for like lunch. I mean, I don't know how in the hot sun and if you want to get cool, you got in the shade.
So as long as you showed up for supper, nobody was worrying about you.
Nobody, as long as I showed up, they had, and nobody was worried about me. They were, back then, we didn't lock our doors. My mother and father didn't worry. They knew I would be within, I wasn't going to do anything. Of course, people you didn't have to worry about somebody then. Everybody rode their bicycles or walked. You very seldom had a friend with a car, and we really didn't have anywhere you could go with a car, I guess, anyway, until later, on. But the beach, we walked to the beach. That was as popular later in my life as the flats were, and
okay. So once you become a teenager,
well, this was pre-teen, yeah. The beach was the happening place, and not just for us at Ackworth, but around towns around Ackworth. I mean, they'd come from, Marietta and lots of places that we didn't frequently go to. They would come here. So we had friends that lived out of town. So, which I wouldn't have had it not for that beach, and it was really a happening place.
Well, you did a lot of swimming.
Well, just playing, swimming. I didn't have at that time I didn't have a boat. As a kid living on Wynn Street, I would frequently, without my parents knowing it, go to the lake, straight down Wynn Street onto the little lake. One time I pulled an old boat out of the water and tarred the bottom of it a little bit and fixed it and made me a sailboat and sailed all over that little lake and couldn't go but one direction, didn't know how to make it go, but have to take the winds, had to take my sails down. My mother had to be missing sheets and had to paddle it back. But as long as the wind was going right, I could fly in that thing. That was my first experience with a boat. And then when my mother and father would get home from work, lots of days they would take us to the lake to go swimming. That was a big thing when I was 8 or 9. We'd get to go to the lake swimming, them not knowing I'd already been to the...
Well, now, I was wondering, they have lifeguards down there? How's anybody? No?
At the beach swimming, they did have a lifeguard.
But where you were going?
Where I was going was no. And I'd also fish. We fished a lot. Loved to fish.
Where did you learn to swim?
Learned to swim in the little lake off of a log and almost, I remember almost drowning one time.
So you taught yourself?
I taught myself. I thought I could swim, and I was on a log, and a guy that lived over on one street over, which was older, there was a bunch of people down there swimming, and I for some reason turned loose of the log I was floating on, was going back towards the bank and tried to swim and wasn't keeping myself up. And his name was Grogan. He was later a sheriff or deputy or something over in Dallas area, I think. It was either Perry Grogan or one of those. He was older, but I remember him saving me. If it hadn't been for him, I might not be sitting here. But you know, at that time, I didn't know that, and but I taught myself to swim. But most of the time, it wouldn't just be me by myself. It would be, you know, some of us guys that I'd play with. And
we had a reference or two to dances in the beach house.
Oh God, that was me, Dance King.
Really?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That was that was very popular then for teenagers. You know, it was kind of the fun days, I guess. Yeah. You know, and of course we didn't know then we were that, but dancing was really, and I could do it. Taught myself. You know, I had a little and you know, all this was the start of the bebop, I guess, or rock and roll type stuff. So, but yeah, I was right in there on that. And that was meeting those girls from Marietta too. You know, yeah, that was definitely a big part of my life.
Okay, you must have been of the age to start to open up North Cobb High School.
Right. The first year, when they changed over from Ackworth to North Cobb, and that's right when I left to go in the military. So I did go to North Cobb, and that was in '60. So, but most of my years was at, you know, like I say, from Ackworth.
You graduated in 60 or 61?
I didn't graduate. I left with Fuzz to go at 17 to go with a friend to go into service.
Okay.
And
what did your parents think about that?
So mad at me they couldn't. But as it turned out, I did graduate, but I got my GED afterwards.
Right. Did you get it in the military?
Yes, right immediately I had to do that. And yeah, they didn't. They was of course against it. They were believed in exactly what I had told you earlier. And
were there any coaches along the way or teachers that influenced you?
Yes, several. I'm going to say one of the guys that influenced me the most. He went to our church. He was a coach. He was a friend. His name was Emery Sewell.
Okay.
He moved here from somewhere else, but he could relate to kids, and he talked to me like I could relate to. And you know, as being 15 back then, it was kind of a kid. You knew it all. You know, of course. You know, I could have run the country back then as much as I knew. And he was a man of his word. He was just a good man. He was a religious man. He believed in. He kind of believed in you, you know, and he would relate to you in such a way that you wouldn't want to let him down. He was just such a good guy, and he was also. He didn't look like it, but he was also a good athlete. And if you wanted to challenge him anyway, he could handle that. He might have been a little heavy, but he could still outrun most people. He could do more push-ups. And he was just so. but yet he was very smart guy, and yeah, he influenced me a lot.
Great.
I will say.
So you go into the Air Force,
Going to the Air Force.
and you saw the world.
Well, I spent most of my time in Asia. I did 2 tours in Asia, and which were 24-month, 2 12-month tours, which is a long time at that age without coming back to the, coming back to the state, I guess, and grew up a lot there. It was probably one of the best things I done, but when I came back from there, after serving 2 tours, I had a friend that was kind of could help me get stationed somewhere, so I put in for several places close to home, or Florida, or somewhere in Georgia, and they sent me to Spokane, Washington. Couldn't have got no further. And I came home for 30 days, and then I went to Spokane, Washington, and then I left there and went temporary duty back to England, and then I came back there and spent the rest of my time and got discharged, and immediately came right back to Ackworth.
Okay.
Couldn't wait.
Wow. What kind of planes were you working on? What were your jobs in the military?
Well, it was my job was supply,
okay.
Mostly just supply.
Okay.
And of course, this was, as you know, the start of the Vietnam and so forth, and
did you pay much attention to how the war was going?
It was, well,
I mean, it wasn't much going at that point. To 65.
It was, but it was quite an experience. It was, back then, by the time I got out of the military, I don't think people was as fond of people in the military for some reason. I remember 64.
And already?
And it was people I think was like we were doing something wrong or something. I don't know. They had a few protests, and especially the next 2 years I spent in the National Guard. I have flew and put civilian clothes on, and that's a shame. But anyway,
were you doing your reserves at Dobbins?
I was at Dobbins, and I actually also worked at Dobbins, and you had to be in the National Guard to have the job I had there, and so that was
people around Ackworth think about the military in those days.
Ackworth, I didn't have a problem in Ackworth. But you could just see clips in other places around where they were. It was the Vietnam thing, I think. I don't know. It wasn't as bad, the start of it, I think, as it was in the late 70s. But.
But you're saying very early on,
yeah.
Negative.
But it was. But the military was. I grew up there. It was good for me, and I would do it all over again.
Okay.
I'm proud to to say I'm a veteran, and
yeah, sure, you ought to be. Okay, so you were working for Dobbins as well as doing your reserve duties.
Right.
What were you doing at Dobbins?
The same was in same as I was in the military, just about. supply for 'em. And it was a good, it was a good job, close, and it was. I tried to. I was thinking I might get on at Lockheed, but Lockheed at that time was up and down. When I would be unemployed, they would have a layoff, and and when I wasn't working, they'd be hiring. I mean, when I was working, they'd be hiring.
Right,
so.
right. And there's always the last hired, first fired, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you talk a little bit about your business career, because you did some entrepreneurial things along the way and work for yourself and all that. Why don't you talk about what you did?
Well, I worked with my brother-in-law, Floyd Clark, who I guess he inspired me a lot also, but I worked with him selling automobiles. We actually went into selling mobile home and campers at one time. And we also sold at one time boats. Being on the lake, that was a good thing being up here. And we all did it from the same location, right there on Clark's Corner, or what it's known as now, right down from not too far from, of course, from where we lived. And then later, I started by selling mobile homes and campers. I saw early on that they're building these affordable mobile home places, and people are charging ground rent, to park them and so forth. And I thought, well, that's going to do anything but get better, and maybe that'd be something I need to try to get into, like maybe renting some space. So I eventually bought a little place and developed a little mobile home park, and then I started developing with him some mobile home subdivisions where you could have your own land and sell. And so, and then I had bought a few houses and started renting. And I was doing all this while I was working with him or working another job. And
do your own repairs on your rental house?
Well, what I could do, and we usually had a maintenance man that wouldn't be, he wouldn't necessarily be a electrician, but he could do a little electrician work, or a plumber, we could do a little. And of course, early on, I had to try to do what I could do myself, of course, not being able to afford to hire somebody. Of course, a long time ago, we tried to, if you had something go wrong, you tried to fix it first yourself, which might have cost me more money, I guess. I might have tore something up before, but yes, and I kept doing that and afforded myself a decent living by, working at it, and I did all that right here from Ackworth.
You mentioned your brother-in-law. When did you get married? Did you get married after you got back from the military?
I did. And I lived right here in Ackworth. Of course, we wouldn't. And had 2 daughters, and one of them lives in Kennesaw, and one lives on Lake Lanier. And so they all live, they hadn't get away too far either, And I guess we'll always pretty much call Ackworth home. I have, one time I moved out to Dallas Highway and built a house and had a Powder Springs address, and hated it because we couldn't call it Ackworth. And Eventually, then I sold it and moved back and built right back in Ackworth. And I now live at Red Top, and I really live, I have a Cartersville address, but it's really Emerson or, but Ackworth, but I do have a Cartersville address. So when we're on the trips or out of town or whatever, and I'm always been the type when somebody says, "Where y'all from?" I say, Ackworth. My wife wants to say, "Oh, we're from Atlanta." I never. We're from Ackworth. And she said, "Well, they won't know where Ackworth is." I said, "Well, we tell them it's just north of Atlanta." But I always, you never know. So I always say that, but.
Yeah. How has Ackworth changed since you got here back in the 50s?
Oh, God. Changed a lot. Changed so much. A lot of new houses and subdivisions. The little town back then in the 50s, like I said earlier about, it was, you just walk down the street, there would be so many people you'd have to go around. But you'd know 80% of the people by their first and last name. You know, you either went to school with them or it would be your schoolmates' parents or their grandparents, and you knew everybody having a small population. And, you know, and of course, you know, back then having the mills, and it was a little cotton town. I remember, I know this dates me back, but I remember living on Main Street. I remember as far back as I have seen them hang a bag of mail at the depot right there on a stand, and the train come by and snatch it. I have seen that.
So they didn't even have to, well, I guess
they didn't stop.
Down, but didn't stop.
They slowed down till they come to Ackworth and snatch it. I remember seeing that as a kid. Couldn't believe it. Wow. But they would just, you know, had a lot of trains back then growing up. But Ackworth changed a lot, and a lot of it's been for the good. They've done the city fathers of Ackworth have really, they've done a good job around Ackworth, bringing it back. A lot of small towns, boarded all their Main Street. A lot of stuff's boarded up, or you know, it's not activity. Even though we got 41 and other places, the little town of Ackworth is still a lot of people. And growing up also, this was something that we did. I guess we had nothing else, but we'd go, if we went out on a date, we'd come back after the date and we'd sit downtown Ackworth where the police and sitting, or somebody had a car, we'd sit in there and talk till 12 or 1 maybe, and then go home. But even after whatever we did, we'd come back and sit downtown. And that downtown was, you know, was nothing. Waiting for somebody to ride through that we knew, I guess. But I also, at one time, when I was in the late 80s, I served on the zoning board in Ackworth for a while. And at that time, we were trying to bring businesses in and things that would make Ackworth grow. Where before, I think typically like any small town, with them having the mills here and stuff, I think they didn't want industry really coming in, but all that kind of changed, you know, and but they've really done a good job with Ackworth. It really looks good downtown. It's clean. It's safe. A lot of activity. A lot of good places to eat. We eat in Ackworth a lot, and I still see a lot of old friends. that I've known, grew up with, right here in Aqua. So.
Well, you're not that far away at Red Top Mountain.
No, and I come to. Well, my office is in Aqua, so I work right out of.
So you're still working?
Every day every day I'm in Aqua. And actually, one end of Glade Road really is Aqua. It's like I say, I have a Carswell address, but it's really in a vicinity also,
so
Bartow
you're
County.
not ever going to retire, I guess.
Well, I don't.
No plans.
I don't have. I'm sure someday I guess I will, but right now I don't know what I would be doing. That I'm doing exactly as I want to do. I travel a lot. I've been so blessed. My health's good. I don't know. I do. I go and come as pretty much as I want to. I'm just living as good as I don't know. The good Lord's just been good to me, and I'm so blessed just to live in a place like this. We don't have extreme anything. It's not extreme cold or heat or and the people are just, it's just, hey, I'm just happy. And I'm proud to be an Aquarian,
Well, Mr. Bryan, maybe that's a good way to end the interview.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.